Hey guys, welcome to today's episode on Azure Storage Accounts. Azure Storage Accounts. Over here, to my right here, we do have the VM we built a few days ago called Prod Front End Linux VM01. And an essential part of an IS infrastructure is where data is kept. Now, when I look at this virtual machine, I see its IP for communication, I see its CPU and RAM really for performance and computational power. But then I also see an important part here being the disks. So I can see that it has an operating system disk, that is a disk that comes with the VM, and it's the one running that version of operating system called Linux. So I'm running Linux over here. Okay. Um, what is good to note here is every virtual machine would need a disk of a sort to work. So when I go into disks now, I'll see that it has a primary disk called the OS disk, and there's the name. It has the virtual machine name plus a number for the disk one, and of course a nice coded string. And it has the type of storage, and of course the size of storage, maximum input outputs, and then throughput, and then the encryption, the default encryption at rest, SSE with PMK. Okay, look that up. Okay, all right. So that is just a VM. Okay, and it's located somewhere in a building, and I say a building here in for a business. Okay, I'm gonna go and sketch a few things here. Let me turn this off. We have this virtual machine. The virtual machine has a disk. Okay, so this disk, okay, is the one that has the operating system. In the first code you would encounter on a machine as a computer would be the operating system. And this operating system tells the computer what to do and gets you and I to interact with the computer. We can interact with the NIC for networking, interact with the CPU and the RAM, for computational works. But of course, we can interact with other parts of the system. Sometimes we can interact with the button shutdown and power on stuff, DOWN. But then there's more to a virtual machine than a disk. Now, a disk here, or an OS disk for that matter, should not be a place where you store your data. Okay, that's really old school. The reason being that if this disk dies, if it gets corrupted, now your VM won't work, of course, because your OS is compromised, but then your data too is compromised. So ideally, you would separate your data disks from your operating system disks. Okay, so that's OS and that's the data. Okay, that's all well and good as long as you have good backups for the data you store on these disks. It's all well and good, but it's still within that VM and only accessible by the VM. Okay, so then we fast forward to utilizing Azure Storage Accounts. Let's look at some benefits of this. Okay, now let's assume that we have your developer working on this machine. Let's call this VM1. You got another developer somewhere in Japan working on VM2. You got another person somewhere in Australia, and they happen to actually be working on a server, and that server is called SRV1. Now, if I wanted to write, let's go over here. If I wanted to write to a data to VM1 from server 1, I would have to find a way to connect over to VM1, then write to the disk. This is definitely not optimal. And of course, it means that you have to now increase overhead. You need to work on networking. You need to think of a way to secure the traffic between these machines. You have to go over internet spaces, and that quickly becomes very complex and highly unnecessary. So Microsoft Cloud implemented something called the Azure Storage. And then there's a solution for modern data scenarios. Okay, so let me just go into a scenario first. Let's turn this off. Let's create this green thing called the MNT. So MNT is actually a storage account called MNT. Let's say the storage account is over here in an Azure cloud. This storage account is called MNT. Now, MNT sits here. So what I'll do the VM1 is I'll connect over to Azure for that MNT storage account. On VM2, because I need to do collaboration, I need to work on the same MNT, I would also connect over here to Azure. So let's say this is Azure, and of course, what you see here is the storage account. But then server one all the way from Australia doesn't need to traverse the network anymore. It just needs to come and connect to this secured storage facility or solution by Microsoft Azure. And from here, I can create a folder here called SRV1. Over here, VM2 can create a folder called VM2. And of course, VM1 can also create a folder called VM1. Now, this VM1, when I go into my operating system, regardless of what it is, and I look at the directories, I can see that I have this mount called MNT. Then, of course, I was just seeing things like the VM1, I'll see SRV1, and I'll see VM2. Okay, so now somebody on SRV1 has access to all these and they can all collaborate and work together. Of course, if you want SRV to have a file share here that is not accessible by VM1 and VM2, it is all going to be down to which user has which account access. Okay, so let's make this guy. So SRV1 could have access to this green guy, could have access to that. And of course, VM1 can have access to this as well. Okay, so this is a better way. And the reason why it's better as well is you don't need to worry about speed and performance. That's all managed by Azure on their side. Yours is to make sure that you can freely connect to this resource and also dynamically design this to scale exponentially when you need it. Now, this storage account supports different types of storage scenarios. Okay. Now, your disk is really files. Okay. You can store other things, but when it comes to things like tables and queues and everything else, this cannot do it. Okay. You need special software on your operating system to enable this disk, this inbuilt disk, to do fancy stuff. That is still very not optimal. So what we do now is we utilize a facility made available by Microsoft for our benefit. So on this next slide here, as I clear the screen and zoom in a bit more, you see that there are four really types of storage in the storage accounts that you can implement. Now, you see something called the blob. This is actually by far the most popular storage account type that you would utilize on a day-to-day basis. Most people with IaaS solutions like a VM would create a shared or a mounted volume that connects to this blob storage. And in this blob storage, you can store things like images and videos. Okay. But then on the other hand, in the same storage account, remember this is one storage account, you can have something called a table. What is table data? Well, mostly table data is got to do with columns and rows, and you have your fields. Okay, so we can have this one for name, DOB, address. Okay, those are tables. Okay, so one storage account can actually handle tables as well. That is remarkable. So you don't particularly need an SQL per se to handle a table really. Then we have, so yeah, so this blob here really, my mind was actually on the blob, but the blob here really is for when you have websites. Okay, I need to correct that. When you have websites and you have images on your websites, you normally use the blob storage. So you can actually reference when you do image src from HTML, you can reference the blob. Really, ignore this for a second. Your blob is really for these things, images and videos, and it's likely used by websites. Okay, but the file is creating an NFS file share solutions, and that's what you would use your VMs for. Okay, so that's actually the correct information. I think I got too excited by the blob. So, but the correct one is your VM would utilize file storage. Then we can store queues, and that's for sending and receiving messages. And mostly it's in rapid succession. So we have things that connect to queues, message queues, to your right and back forwards quickly, and it needs to be quick chunks of data coming in, flowing in, and then quick chunks of data flowing out. Okay, and that is what we call the queue. Okay, so we go ahead and we're going to create one. But before then, let's look at a quick scenario. When I move over here, you can see that we have, okay, so we do have story tiers. Let's clear that. Okay, these are tiers you can have in storage. We have the hot tier, the cold tier, and the archiving tier. The hot tier is the highest storage cost, but it costs more money to have that hot tier, but it means that when you are accessing it, it doesn't cost much. Why? Because it's quick to get to it. You can get access to data very quickly. The cold tier may cost you less, but it takes you longer to get access to your resources there. The archive, okay, it costs you way less, but it costs you more time to get access to your precious data. So hot is what everybody uses really. But then when you scroll up here, an example is a classic website as in Amazon.com or retailshop.com, and you see that they have products. Let's use this fading pen. So they have a product here. Now they have sections for electronics and home and toys and kitchen. That's fine. And they have images representing these different um, okay, so these different categories, okay? But these images, as you see, are stored in a blob, okay? All right, because blob stores images and videos. And let's say there's a video here, that will also be stored in the blob. But behind this is a table, and that table is a database that also keeps all the information for these categories and their stock and information and everything else. So that also is stored in a table. Of course, we have a file share. Normally, a file share will not be here because that will be sitting on the servers really for the servers to talk to each other to do important things. Okay, but for a website, ideally they will be using more blob sort of storage account. Now let me just try and zoom in here a little bit and let's have a look at what this is saying. Okay, so we're talking of images stored in storage accounts, the number of items in the in stock quantities they're stored in DBs or tables. The descriptions are stored in XML, JSON, YAML data, and that's all in the same storage account. Then you have a payment system behind the scenes, okay, credit cards, and you could have a server running, well, it could be a VM server running this whole backend, okay? So storage accounts are very crucially important. But of course, you don't have one person in Amazon doing all this job. You have people from all over the world, from West Africa, East Africa, North Africa, South Africa, from the Americas, and from Australia, and from Europe, from all over the world. And they need to find a way to work together. And one of the ways to do so is have access to these storage accounts and have access to these tables and these queues and these blob storage and put data, retrieve data, store data, retrieve store data, and what have you. So without much ado, let's go ahead and create our first storage account. Okay, let me click here, clear my screen, and go back here. Now on Azure, to create a storage account, let me close this thing out here. You type storage at the top here. Then that gives you this symbol, that green striped squared stuff. So storage accounts, by default, I have one called a CSV. That is just for the console. When I run my console here, it has to run on the storage account. Okay, but let me create one myself. So to create a storage account is pretty straightforward. Just like creating a virtual machine, you can put a storage account in a certain resource group. Okay, this was really for the machines. I can create a resource group dedicated for storage accounts. I just don't want to do that. I'm going to put it all in one place now. So I'm going to put it here. And then the storage account here name is very unique. You can't have hyphens. Shouldn't be very long. So I'm going to call this one Enterprise. And that may be too long actually. Yeah. And yes. And one thing, it must be unique. Now, unique how? This storage account is how Microsoft will identify you, your storage account. And what you say here must be unique and not globally used by anybody else all over the world. Okay, you don't want that. So they're telling you create a unique storage account. Now I can create one, and what comes to mind right now is today's date. So I can create one, and I can call it STOR, and it's 2057 27082023. Now that might be a bit too long, but let's see. Okay, not too long. And for latency, I'm in UK South, so I put the storage account in UK South. And there are two types for performance. We have standard and your premium, of course. When you hover over here, you see that we have performance for blobs, file shares, page blobs in storage accounts. You can learn more, but that is for you to do later on. I'm going to go standard, not no premium stuff now. Then it comes to redundancy. Oh, what is redundancy? We talked about this some time back in some of the videos. Okay, so the data in your Azure storage account is always replicated to ensure durability and high availability. Microsoft stored this in many other geographical regions. Okay, it's stored many other places. Now there are many other options. We have, let's break it down here, and I will sketch on here. Locally redundant means that it's the lowest cost option with basic protection. It's not something very special. Okay, but then it protects you against when the server racks and drives fails. Okay, it's good for non-critical scenarios. Of course, that would be for if you have a cheap VM and you want to play with it, you can do an LRS. That's fine. But then zero redundant storage is intermediate option. Is better than this one here with failover capabilities in the secondary region. So although it's stored in one region, they do have a replica of the same storage account in another region. So if region one goes bust, there's an earthquake, it doesn't matter. Your traffic will be routed to this one without even you knowing about it. Then we have zone redundant storage, intermediate option with protection against data center level failures, recommended for high availability scenarios. So you have your zone, your availability zone, the data centers in your zones. Okay, if data centers there fail, that's all right. 300 miles down the line in the same region, we have data centers for the availability zone. Okay, your data could be stored there. Then we have the geo zone redundant storage. That's the very most optimal data protection solution. It includes this GRS and ZRS together. So it combines the two. Okay, you have it in your availability zones and also in your other regions. Okay, all right. So if this goes down, this is fine. If this all go down, this is fine. If this goes down, that is fine. So it's always going to be up. Okay. So we're just going with the geo redundant storage account. Okay, I could go local, but let's stick with the default for now. So remember, in your exams, they ask you what's the default when you're building this. It's really the geo redundant storage account. Then we go advanced. When you come to advanced here, there are a lot of things here. You can configure a lot of security here. Okay, it says you want to require secure transfer for REST API operations, and that just talks to you about option that enhances security of your storage account by allowing only REST API operations on the storage account using HTTPS. So they really definitely want security. So 443 on your connections. Okay, there's more to it. You have to take your time and go through all these things. But I'll stick with all the defaults for now. TLS version. In the past, you could use legacy TLS versions, but today we stick with 1.2. It's the most secured one. Okay. Where can you copy operations? Well, for any storage account, you can do copying. Now, this is if you want to do something like SFTP, you can do something called enable hierarchical namespace, but we're not doing that now. Okay, and then we go into networking. How do you want to have access to this VM, this blob storage? Well, what you do, we just want access to it from the internet. Okay, the internet. All right, so we will do that. I'll let you go into a VM and then connect from there so you can see the files we create and what it looks like in a short moment. Then we have network routing here. It says, do you want Microsoft networking so you can access Microsoft resources? So Microsoft network routing will direct your traffic to enter Microsoft Cloud as quickly as possible. So you don't want to go through the internet per se. You want to be able to use the Microsoft networking to get to this blob storage faster than traversing the World Wide Web. Okay. All right. And the next one is data protection. These are all defaults. Okay. Self deletes. You can change all these to suit what you desire. But come here and do click on learn more, and you can learn a bit more on here. Encryption. The encryption type, every data needs to be encrypted so that nobody can steal the data or copy it in transit and see what's there. Okay, today on your social media platforms, they have something called end-to-end encryption. Microsoft enables encryption on your storage account as well. Okay, all right, and you do have support for customer managed keys. There are keys that you can bring in, and there are keys that Microsoft provides. Okay, then we go into tags. Now I'm going to call it environment one more time, and then it's the production. Okay, so when I go into section everything in the resource group with the name environment, I will see production, I will see the VM because that was also tagged the same way. It tells me there's an issue. Let's go and have a look. Okay, interestingly, that subscription has been disabled. I'll have to do stuff on there. But this is how you create a storage account. We'll come out to this in a moment. Okay. And once you create it, I'm going to show you what it looks like when you create a storage account. You'll see your containers, your file shares, your queues, and tables. Okay. Now the containers are really your blob storage, blob. File shares are your NFS shares, okay, which is the one you can connect to from your computer. And to connect, you click on the three dots here and the connect, and that will give you connection keys to connect to it. It appears my subscription has been blocked for a reason. I'll check it out. And then we have queues and we have tables. Okay. All right, listen, thank you for your time and go ahead and follow that tutorial to create your own storage account. I'll also add a longer video to help you to also build one from scratch. All right, then. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next one.